Über einen Comic, auf den ich unglaublich lange gewartet habe, aber da will ich jetzt noch gar nicht direkt drüber reden, denn darüber sprechen wir beide gleich auf Englisch. Übersetzung gibt es leider nicht, mein Englisch ist schlecht genug, das verstehen Sie sowieso. Und Craig ist jemand, der ausgesprochen fließend sprechen kann, da wird es auch überhaupt kein Problem. Eine Sache, die aber wichtig ist, vorneweg zu erklären: Es wird danach eine Signierstunde geben. Nehmen Sie bitte das Wort Signierstunde wörtlich. Craig Thompson hat 60 Minuten Zeit. Sein Timetable ist extrem eng gestrickt. Das heißt, wir können 30 Leute zulassen, die etwas signiert bekommen. Ich habe hier Zettel mit 1 bis 30. Die gebe ich am Ende, damit Sie auch einen Ansporn haben, hier zu bleiben, aus. Bitte lassen Sie nur Bücher von Craig Thompson signieren und nicht mehr als eines pro Person, damit er mit den 30 Leuten wenigstens durchkommt. Das heißt also bitte keine Skizzenbücher, keine einzelnen Blätter Papier, wirklich nur Bücher. Der gute Mann lebt vom Comiczeichnen, der muss sie verkaufen. Sie wollen vielleicht Skizzen verkaufen, dann müssen Sie es aus den Büchern ausreißen. Pech. Bitte halten Sie sich daran und Sie haben 5 Minuten oder vielleicht sogar 10 Minuten Zeit, ganz gemütlich zum Signiertisch zu schlendern. Sie haben ja eh die Nummer, es kann Ihnen niemand den Platz wegnehmen. Denn Craig muss danach auch noch ein ganz kleines Fernsehinterview geben. Das wird blitzschnell gehen, das ist uns versprochen worden. Das heißt, spätestens 10 Minuten nach der Veranstaltung fängt die Signierstunde an. Die wird auch 60 Minuten währen, die ist also nicht nach 50 Minuten aus. Aber das sind sozusagen diese Dinge. Das Interview wird dann morgen in der Tagesschau, allerdings mittags zu sehen sein. So, those were the preliminaries, so very sorry for talking so much in German. Please, ladies and gentlemen, welcome Craig Thompson. Craig, it was one of the most surprising moments in my life when I saw your book, when I was on vacation in France. I saw the French edition first, and I thought it's not possible. It can't be the new book by Craig Thompson, because he did Blankets 8 years ago, and that was a book with 580 pages or something like that. Incredible volume, wonderfully told, but what a work, what effort. And I thought, okay, that was one in a lifetime work. He will never do anything again. That one has 670 pages. Are you mad?
A little bit. I did go a little crazy. Well, I started Habibi with much more modest intentions. I thought it would be a 200-page book. And it sort of just spiraled out of control. It grew by hundreds of pages and wandered off in tangents. That for me is like the most exciting moment in narrative and visual arts, is the moment where things wander.
First time when I read about Habibi was, I guess, on the back page of your Carnet de Voyage, when it was told you went to Morocco to make some research for your new book, which would be called Habibi. So you started that in 2003 already, exactly after Blankets, or when did you start, or when did you have the idea?
That was a little bit of a marketing scheme. Morocco wasn't really a research trip. So I started writing Habibi in January 2004. And what happened actually is I was unhappy in Portland, Oregon, and I was going to escape to France for 3 weeks just for a trip for myself. And my foreign publishers, my European publishers, caught wind of this and turned it into a 3-month book tour. So I had all this anxiety about suddenly my personal trip was a book tour, and so I carved out 3 weeks in Morocco just for myself. And it wasn't directly a research trip. If it had been research, I probably would have brought a camera, but instead I was just making drawings.
You brought your sketchbook with you?
I did bring a sketchbook. All my sketchbook drawings are in the collected carnet. But otherwise, I don't know. It was on some form. It was like some of the beginning of my dialogues with Muslims, and that extended in Portland to a circle of Muslim friends. So that, in a sense, influenced the book.
One other thing which I found really fascinating was that Blankets was about, let's say, kind of Christian fundamentalism. So growing up in a Christian family and with all the difficulties which Christian moral could pose to a young man. And now we have another background. We have the Islamic world, we have a Muslim girl who's the main character, and a Muslim boy, and they fall in love. And of course they have even more difficulties with their culture. Is that a direct line which goes from Blankets to Habibi, or is it a new approach in the way of dealing with religion and topics like that?
I guess it's sort of direct. It's an extension. The book is a bit of a meditation on the connections between the Abrahamic faiths, so Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, focusing on the shared stories. You know, I mean, the faiths are very similar in terms of their lifestyles and morals, but maybe most importantly, the stories that shape them. And so I got very excited by the connections and wanted to explore them. And there's slight divergences, of course. Those were fun to wander off into too, but essentially they all flow from the same source.
It's a complete different story structure. There are very many time lapses and flashbacks and things like that. So it's a much more complex work and narrative approach.
Yeah, it's not very linear. The first draft of the book was linear and felt very flat and lifeless to me. That's when I rediscovered the magic square symbol in my notes, and it's sort of a mystical Sudoku. It's 3x3 magic squares where each square encompasses an Arabic letter with its corresponding numeric value. I started thinking of that as a structure for the book, where each chapter, 9 chapters, is represented by an Arabic letter, and themes around that, the numeric value of that number, or that letter, and then also a geometric design corresponding with the number. That sounds abstract maybe it makes more sense if you read the book.
Exactly, and that's the thing I'd like to recommend, because everything we are talking right now about is much more easy to understand if you're just reading the book.
Yeah,
we'll just give you some hints that makes you start reading. And so we will just have to talk a little bit about your graphics, for example. This, of course, it's very early in the book. It's kind of the introduction of the girl character, which you see first when she is sold as a bride by her family to this scribe, to this, well, very much older man, as you can see. But it's a kind of introduction to the world, as far as I understand that, because he is a scribe and he learns her to read and to write. But of course, it's from a Western point of view, it's a very strange relationship having a grown-up man who buys a 9-year-old girl as a bride.
I actually don't think it's that. Well, one, I don't like that. I've used them too, though. I don't like the labels East and West. I think part of the theme of Habibi is that those are just labels or imaginary constructions that separate people. That's part of the point. And so I get a little defensive when people say, like, well, this reflects some other culture, because I think this is a universal experience that children, are exploited by adults throughout the world. So when I was focusing a lot on sexual trauma, which I think is an experience that people go through everywhere on certain levels.
But you're using kind of these oriental ornaments all the time. This, of course, is one of the main differences to the blankets, which was told in a classical American kind of storytelling, even if you did quite a lot with your pages and things. But this is absolutely stunning when you look at the different pages. Can we have the next one, please? This one, of course, is very classical, but as you can see, there's always a direct, well, let's say, line which goes from panel to panel, but not just from left to right, but even top down, and even sometimes in a way which we are not used to read books, because, of course, sometimes you're using the Arabic way of reading from right to left and things like that. And the next panel, please. They have again something completely different. For example, here starts a flashback, and you see the flashback is shown because it's getting dark around the flashback panel, which makes it very easy to orientate in this book, because every time there is a flashback, it's lined in black. There's much thinking in this book, much more thinking than in Blankets, in a structural way.
Yeah, I always thought of Blankets as a sort of minimalist story, even though it's just as long. It's very spacious and breathable, like a sort of stark Midwestern landscape. And with Habibi, it became much more dense and swirling, drawing from all this visual inspiration from the Arabic calligraphy and the ornamentation, the geometric design. I really wanted to pay tribute to that sort of dense, swirling ornamentation. But then a lot of it is just about comics too. I think comics have this unique ability to make these big leaps in time and space on the same page. So you're able to keep a foothold visually and several panels at once. That's hard to do in other forms. Like in prose, you don't have the visual cues, and in film, it's just washing over you or past you. It's really hard you can rewind a DVD, but you can't look at a page and place yourself in different locations and times all at the same time the way you can in comics. So I took advantage of that secret power of comics.
How did you get the expertise in Arabic arts and writing and everything like this?
Well, it's not expertise. It's more like a glorified tracing. So I never learned to read or write Arabic. I depended on a circle of friends that were fluent in Arabic as consultants. I learned the alphabet, so I could spot words in a sentence if I knew the Arabic word. But for the most part, it was a glorified sort of tracing. I was using programs like TextEdit on my computer to lay out Arabic text that works really well with right-to-left fonts. and then I would lightbox them and trace them with a brush onto the page. And I always used a brush for my inking. I don't use like a traditional calligrapher's tool of a chiseled reed or something. It's just it's a form of copying essentially, and a form of collage, which is another thing that comics are powerful at. Not only making these leaps in time and space, but also juxtaposing. As you can juxtapose images in sequence, you can juxtapose ideas and stories, and it's a collage medium in some ways.
You're even juxtaposing different time levels, because all that takes place in a land which in the German translation is called Vanatolien. Is it Vanatolia in English too? Because
it's funny that you have this page up, because this page looks kind of Star Warsy.
It does. That in fact was one thing which I'd like to ask you about.
Oh yeah.
The Sand People in Star Wars and those
Yeah,
guys.
that's what Habibi's like Star Wars. It's like a galaxy long ago, far away. Like it's outside of any time or geography. It's a fairy tale world. So it allowed me as the creator to draw very fast and loose from all different cultures, all different times, and then also it's a dreamscape. It's the core of it is just imaginary, and then I was able to draw influence from all over the place.
But you have, of course, many similarities to the modern world. You have slums and big metropolis structures, and you have kind of major disaster areas even. You have this boat which was stranded in the middle of the desert, and no one knows how it ever got here. You don't pose yourself these questions, I guess. The boat is just there.
Yeah, the boat made sense to me, and I've seen photos of like stranded boats in the Aral Sea, because of the drought that they were landlocked basically in the desert. So. That's not a wholly original idea, but this definitely these environmental themes. I think the industrialization and the sort of globalization ties in with all the environmental and pollution themes, water crisis themes in the book. I was processing a lot of American guilt, the sense that wealth in one nation feasts off the poverty in other nations, and so in my little fairy tale landscape, it's sort of like a castle on the hill. There's one Anatolia, this rich nation. The name comes from the Anatolia project in Turkey, which is a system of dams that sort of have cut off water supply from Syria and Iraq. But for me, it was a great symbol of like a small little ecosystem of like the rich city and then the poor slums and this wasteland, not this desert, this barren desertscape in between.
Have you visited some of these places?
I have visited a few developing countries, or the global south, or whatever people want to call it. And when you go to those places, you definitely feel the boundary where the old world and the new world meet. Or at least, like people are living the way they used to live hundreds of years ago, and that's butting up against globalization and all our, industrial filth and the waste. An ironic thing about living in the States is nobody thinks about where all the waste goes. It's all about consumerism.
Same in Germany too.
And the waste is invisible. We ship our plastic bottles off to China basically. We don't actually recycle any of those. It's crazy that there's these boats going across the Pacific that are full of plastic bottles. It's like, really, is that worth the gas to us? So yeah, I'm commenting on that. My father was a plumber, so I've always, even though my parents are very politically conservative, I've always had a very clear sense of waste management, that humans create waste and it has to go somewhere, it has to be processed. Every time you consume something, you're also destroying something.
So it's even a kind of ecological message in the book.
Yeah, it's a tangle, all kinds of things.
This is one of the segments which I love very much because it's kind of real slapstick. It's a kind of chase through the palace. The young girl is enslaved. She's living in the harem of a kind of pasha or sultan or however you should call him in this Anatolia. And there is a large chase sequence without any words, just action. It seemed for me like a little relaxing pause for you as an artist. Was it that way? Because the style changes so much. The pace of the story is really fast at this point. It is just fun to watch.
I think that earliest 200-page draft, I intended it to be a more straightforward adventure story. So I did retain a lot of those adventurous elements, and especially because some of my earliest inspiration was 1001 Nights, and I wanted to examine that as a genre, in the same way that superheroes or science fiction or any ridiculous cowboys and Indians, they're all genres. That's how I was looking at 1001 Nights. And like in this sequence, I'm stealing from the flying carpet motif, but of course it's not literally flying. So
exactly, that's the funny part of it.
I drew away a lot of the fantastical elements, but kept, some of that surface ornamentation.
When did you choose to widen the concept of the 1001 Nights to this really, let's say, metaphysical approach with the both religions coming together, the Abrahamic themes and things like that? I guess that as far as I understand you, that wasn't in your first plan.
Now, the first plan was more directly inspired by Arabian Nights, whereas Dodola is a sort of Scheherazade character. She tells stories for survival. I was inspired by that element. Only Scheherazade tells stories to avoid her own beheading. Dodola tells stories for the survival of this orphan boy, Zam, that she adopts. And in earlier drafts, I was recycling a lot of the stories from 1001 Nights because I loved all the fantastical elements in them, and that later bored me. I was less interested in fantasy, and instead got more inspired by, again, the connections between the Abrahamic faiths. So yeah, the shared prophets in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, those stories became more interesting and inspiring and dynamic to me than any of the fantasy elements in Arabian Nights.
Would it be let's say, too much to say that you're longing for harmony with a comic like that? There's this ideal of love, of course, between Dodola and Zam, and you're having the two or three monotheistic religions, and then their same source and things like that. But of course, you have, during the course of these 670 pages, you have so many difficulties, which rips people apart and everything like it. But at the end, there is a kind of happy ending. Is that your longing for a harmonious life in the world?
I think that's what most art is about. Most art is born out of longing and trying to touch on the longing that all people share. And abstract things, maybe things from before we were born that we still long for. And also, art is about having a lot of chaos within you that you want to get out on paper and contain within a more graceful form, because inside you it's just a tangled mess. So the desire is to make something fairly graceful on paper, a container, a vessel.
Sexuality plays a very, very important role in every kind of way. Very brutal sexuality, very, very shameful and very, really wonderful sexuality. Of course, it takes a very important place in everyone's life, but you're not used to see that in graphic novels or things like that in the way you are telling about that. Was it kind of difficult to get this past your editors?
Well, I had no real editorial input, so it's very free in that matter. Blankets, my previous book, is really about this sort of innocent awakenings of sexuality. It's very young, naive love sort of experience. But I've always wanted to do a book about sexual trauma, as I mentioned before. So this is sort of diving into some of the darker places around sexuality. The two characters are very traumatized. That part was easy to write. It was easy to write all the horrible things that happened to them. But I was really curious if they could somehow come together in relationship in a place of healing. And I'm glad you say it's an optimistic ending. I don't want to reveal spoilers, but there were surprises, pleasant surprises for me in terms of what the characters were able to find for themselves.
I was kind of happy to get to this good ending. In fact, I was a little bit afraid that it would end on a very, very bitter note. So I would love to tell everybody, just keep in touch with the book, because, well, the guys are lucky in it, at least.
Yeah, in a sense, I think that's a responsibility of an artist too. You don't want to write a Hollywood ending, a generic happy ending.
Nothing like that, of course.
But you can't just produce you can't put all that effort into something and just produce something that's wholly nihilistic or bleak. You do have to find the beauty in the midst of the ugliness. I mean, that's the core of the book.
It is. Yeah, let's talk a little bit about the way of let's say, it's a little bit difficult of iconoclasm as a theme. This, of course, is the exactly opposite of iconoclasm. We have this tradition in the Islamic world that pictures are forbidden, and of course you have this in your book, because you're having the the citing from the Quran, which says everyone who shows a picture is committing a sin. But of course you are doing the exactly opposite. You are doing the most wonderful pictures that you can ever imagine, and the Islamic art does the same, but they do it in a kind of abstract way. That, of course, is something which is fascinating for me as a comic reader. That the comic is a kind of way to mix these two traditions again. You have text, which the Islamic world provides, and you have the pictures, which is a more Christian approach. Was that a kind of way that you were thinking about? That comic is the ideal form of talking about the both faiths?
It is an ideal form. First, I want to clarify that the prohibition of representational images isn't from the Quran. As far as I know, it's from the Hadiths, which are disputed sayings of the Prophet Muhammad. So, those verses themselves are in question, and you could extrapolate that the same prohibitions exist in Judaism and Christianity. There's the same laws against idolatry, and in fact, the book in some ways is a commentary on idolatry, because in erotic or romantic relationships, I mean, there is the sense that we objectify the other, we project an idol onto the other. So I'm meditating on that. But Arabic calligraphy was a massive influence on the book, and I think of Arabic calligraphy as a form of comics, because it's a perfect fusion of word and picture. And that was what I was aiming for all along to explore the dynamic between picture and word. And a lot of times I was acknowledging that the word has a sort of sacred place in many religions, whereas the picture is slightly more vulgar or profane. So it's this juxtaposition of the sacred and profane. And all this said too, I mean, I think in the Muslim world, comics have a wide influence too. People keep talking about the 99, the superhero series. So I think it's almost a misrepresentation to say that the Muslim world is that up in arms about visual representation. I think comics really are a universal language at this point in the world, in all different cultures.
Do you already have any reactions from the Muslim world on Habibi?
Only not from the Muslim world, from the American Muslims. So I mean, that's admittedly a different flavor, but I've had really great reactions from Muslim fans in the States, and I've been on tour for a month there before I just got to Europe. So
should make some proof. Here we have one of the passages which I found absolutely stunning when I just turned the page over. There is a short chapter, but it's about 15 pages or something like that, which is shown just in text. And this, of course, mentions all the things. You have it down there. There's the sighting that Craig was talking about. Die jungen Menschen, die am Tag der Auferstehung am härtesten bestraft werden, sind solche, die Bilder machen. And of course, you spared the pictures here because they were talking about perhaps not the prohibition of pictures, but let's say words are more important than pictures. But it's very unusual for a comic to let us be without pictures for 15 pages with quite a lot of text.
Yeah, it's only 15 pages. Some people think it's more, but yeah, so it's ironic, I guess, that it has that impact because it's the most minimalist chapter in the book. It's very breathable in that sense, and it's very internal. It's a prayer. The whole chapter is a prayer. So it's the character's dialogue either with God or with himself. It's very vulnerable and internal. It seemed crucial to strip away all the distracting elements of the visual and let the words speak for themselves. So, and then later they come back together again, word and picture. But to show the power of them together, I needed to separate them for a while too.
And you're using some of the iconographic tradition, of course, of the Orient. Next picture, please. That is the wheeled prophet, which is shown in most of the illuminated manuscripts from Persia, for example. And so I was very surprised when I saw that too, because it would have been so easy to show the prophet without a veil, because we have many pictures from the Western culture who show Muhammad, but you're using the Oriental kind of representation.
I wanted to be respectful and reverent towards Prophet Muhammad, and I actually prefer this version. I think it makes more sense. I'm drawing from the Persian miniatures, which always use this. And I've seen both, in both the Western and Eastern world, I've seen both depictions, but this is the one that made the most sense to me, and I feel like it's more potent, but it's also more reverent. I feel like it was important for this intent to show through in the work, and I was trusting, like each chapter of the book, each of the 9 chapters represents a different prophet, from Abraham to Adam to Moses, Noah, Jesus, Muhammad. So just a different approach with each prophet. But I was really trusting the dialogues I was having with my Muslim friends in terms of being respectful of of these things.
Did you have any theological advice in dealing with the different ways of talking about the prophets, not just in that kind of representation, but even talking about the prophets from the Old Testament or so? Did you have a theologic, well, let's say, well, kind of expert who just checked your kind of storytelling or something?
No, I have to confess, no. No, I didn't have there wasn't a huge academic influence on the book, so it wasn't born out of an academic background. It was born out of these conversations with a circle of Muslim friends. There's some book research for a lot of the visuals. Yeah, no, it's not an actual scholar that helped me with the book.
Great. Well, now it's something from the final of the book. You see, they are looking quite happy. But that is the thing which I loved when I came to that little very sentence here. Das heißt, den Mann inspiriert eher das Visuelle, die Frau hingegen das Erzählte. The man is inspired by the visual and the woman by the narrated parts or the story. This, of course, is a description of comics. Comics are bringing it together, and so the two genders would find the ideal way of storytelling in comics. So there is a kind of theory of comic writing in the book too, I guess.
Yeah, and do you have the next spread on there or no?
No.
Then the next, I don't know if it's spoiler, but the next page is one page is purely words and one page is purely visual.
I didn't want to spoil everything.
Okay, I won't spoil any more than that. But and then there's this request to abandon both, abandon the narrative, abandon the visual, like let go of both of these boundaries, let them merge. Yeah, I mean it sounds cheesy if I try to describe it in words because I'm not as eloquent in this form. That's why I rely on comics to communicate things more gracefully.
Believe me, it's a very touching moment when you come to that scene, not only in a way of the story, but even in a way that you're understanding why it is told as a comic book. And that was something which really impressed me very, very much. So thank you very much for that. It took 7 years for you to draw this. Will you ever do something like this again? I asked the same thing after Blankets, and you said no, never. So let's hear what you're talking about.
No, I definitely will, just not right now. So next in line, I'm going to be working on 3 books simultaneously, all more modest projects. So I think of these books as about 200 pages. Of course, that's what I thought Habibi would be too.
It's just 600 pages together. So.
Yeah, so I'll do a big book, but it'll be 3 books. And they're all different subjects.
So they're not connected in some way?
No, they're completely different, in fact. Part of that is based off of the suggestion of David B., the French cartoonist, who said he always juggles a couple projects simultaneously, so no one project becomes monotonous or oppressive. So I really want to be able to jump back and forth, and they're wildly different. One is a kid's book, actually, appropriately. It's going to be an all-ages comic book, and that's maybe the one I'm most excited to get started on, because I feel like I've devoted these 7 years to a very serious adult themed book, and I want to get back to the child in me that first discovered the medium. I think it's important.
Well, you were mentioning David B. and I know you admire of his work. Was he kind of influenced to Habibi because he had already mixed these ornaments from the Orient and the Western style of storytelling in some of his comic books. Unfortunately, those are not translated into German, but I read them in French, and I found some connections between these comics.
Yeah, the books you're talking about, is it the Veiled Prophet or something? Those,
yeah, exactly, the Veiled Prophet, or Treasure Hunters and things like that.
Those books came out long after I was started on Habibi, but yeah, David B. has been a big influence on me for the last 15 years or so. So definitely, yeah, he definitely draws the way he works on a page with his compositions. They're not standard compositions. They're breaking things up. They use flat graphics, ornamentation, pattern. Intense, black spaces, a very graphic style, and also fairly non-linear in certain ways in his storytelling. So he's a great influence.
Have you already seen his new album, Les Meilleurs Ennemis, about the relationship between the United States and the Middle East?
No, that sounds great.
It is great. He tells a story from 783 when the United States, recently founded, was fighting the Muslimic pirates in the Mediterranean, and he's telling just until 1953 or something like that, with the CIA in Persia, getting the Shah back into power. It's really fascinating to read this. French Islamic historian wrote him the story, and he drew it, and it's really wonderful. And I found that very interesting because I just got the new comic by David Miller, Holy Terror, which of course is exactly the opposite in the way of dealing with Islamic topics. Did you have to say anything about that comic, or haven't you seen it yet?
I've seen it, I haven't read it, I won't buy it. I mean, I think it's interesting that they're coming out at the same time, and there have been a few reviews that juxtapose the two takes, but I have nothing personal to say about it because I haven't read it. And I'm not desperate to go buy a copy. I'll probably read somebody else's copy, so I don't have to own it.
So, thank you very much for being here, and I hope you have a great trip through Europe. You're for 1 month here. So, thank you for your patience, and now you get the numbers.